Well, things went from incredibly bad to incredibly worse for the Trump administration and the Department of Justice lawyers at a new hearing on Friday before Chief Judge Judge Boasberg. He's the chief judge of the D.C. District Court. He was holding a hearing among several as to whether the injunction that he entered last Saturday late night to stop the Trump administration from continuing to use the Alien Enemies Act and declare a phony war and the phony use of war powers to deport Venezuelans to a notoriously depraved prison in El Salvador. He was holding a hearing as to whether that temporary restraining order should be dissolved based on a motion by the Trump administration. But the judge came in hot. He suggested that the lawyer for the Department of Justice was not telling the truth, or if he was, he better remind everybody on the other side, meaning the Trump administration, about what it means to have character, values, and a reputation in a federal court, commenting that he's never seen more impertinent, unprofessional commentary coming out of the government and the Department of Justice in his lifetime. And it went downhill from there. You know what's not going downhill? This coverage on Legal AF. There are so many moving parts. Let me break it down for you. Earlier today, I reported about a ruling by the same judge as he's trying to get to the bottom whether that very temporary restraining order was violated by planes being launched and not returned after Judge Boasberg, the judge, ordered them not to be returned. Now, everybody outside of the courthouse for the Trump administration, from the press secretary to the lawyers, but not in their filings, we're all saying, well, we didn't understand it to mean we needed to turn around, or he doesn't have the power to do that, so we ignored it, or we didn't understand the oral injunction to be really an injunction at all until an hour later when it was put on the docket and things of that nature. Well, the judge got to the bottom of that pretty quickly when Drew Ensign, the lawyer for the Department of Justice, got roasted by the judge. He said to him, you were in the courtroom last Saturday when I issued my injunction to ask and demand that the planes be turned back around and that the government no longer continue to exercise powers under the Alien Enemies Act related to these Venezuelans. Were you here for that? He said, yes. And the judge says, did you understand my ruling to be an order and a command to be passed on to your clients in the government? And the lawyer said, yes, Your Honor. I understood it to be a command and a order at the time that you issued it orally. Completely counter to what the position has been in the filings by the government, because they keep arguing, we didn't think it was a real injunction until 2 hours later when you put it in writing. And this lawyer, try to save his soul and save his reputation and his ass, responded to the judge truthfully, finally, and said, no, I understood that it was an injunction when you issued it. And I understood what the intent of your injunction was and all of that. And that's when the judge said, listen, I tell my law clerks when they leave, the only thing they have is their reputation and their ethics and their character. I advise you to tell your clients at the government the same thing. And as I said, it went downhill from there. Now, the judge acknowledged that this is a momentous decision he's about to make about whether in peacetime a president can declare somebody an alien enemy and then make it an unreviewable order to send them off to a foreign prison. Never happened before. Let me just give you some of the, there were some judges in, there were some reporters in the room, and this is what we know from it until we get our hands on the transcript. Drew Ensign said he believed Boasberg intended the planes be turned around when he issued his oral order. He said, I understand the intent. You meant that to be effective at that time, which of course is completely different than what the government has been arguing ever since. Here's what else happened. Boasberg elicited from the lawyer for the Department of Justice that they had sent him the argue the case Saturday without having any facts. In other words, they sent Ensign in to argue not being prepared purposely. This is, again, not plausible deniability. And the lawyers for the deportees on the ACLU side had more information about the flights than the government's own arguing lawyer. He then said to the lawyer for the Department of Justice, you understand that my TRO did not order anyone to be released into the United States. I'm not saying you have to release them from prison or from internment. I'm talking about their deportation to Venezuela under this procedure. They also, the judge went on, I did not order that the government could not deport anyone using regular immigration procedures. I only ordered that the government could not summarily deport in custody non-citizens subject to the Alien Enemies Act. And Ensign said the government is complying with the law as it understands the law to be. And Boasberg fired back and said, if that's so, why was this proclamation, this one signed by Trump on Friday, published last Saturday, why was it essentially signed in the dark on Friday? And then these people were rushed onto planes. It seems to me the only reason to do that is if you know it's a problem, in other words, not constitutional, and you want to get them out of the country before the suits are filed. The question teed up, the judge continued, is whether the government can summarily deport people without any individualized assessment of whether they actually fall into the category related to the proclamation on the use of the Alien Enemies Act. In other words, due process. Without due process. What happened if someone is not a member of that gang, TDA, or not a Venezuelan citizen? And now there's reporting that there were certain people, including women, that would not be accepted into the jails even of El Salvador. The government said, well, then, Judge, they should use a writ of habeas corpus petition. In other words, a writ by a jailed person to be brought into court. So there is a concession by the Department of Justice that the individuals targeted by the Alien Enemies Act can challenge the label with a habeas petition. The lawyer for the ACLU argued at the same hearing that the Venezuelans did not have any meaningful chance to use habeas petitions to challenge their designation as terrorist or enemy combatants. And then Boasberg fired back or came back with, I agree, the policy ramifications of this, what I'm about to decide on the temporary restraining order, are incredibly troublesome and problematic and concerning. And I agree, it's an unprecedented and expanded use of an act that's been used, War of 1812, World War I, and World War II. What do they all have in common? Wars. When there was no question, there was a declaration of war and who the enemy was. So at the end, what we had is Boasberg said, I am going to get to the bottom of two things, whether there's been a violation of his temporary restraining order, and he did not rule, having finished the hearing, about whether he's going to vacate or what we call dissolve the temporary restraining order. Let me cut to the chase. He's not dissolving the temporary restraining order. I don't even think he's modifying it. He believes in his heart and in his jurisprudential approach that this decision and power exercise by Donald Trump violates the Constitution because it also violates the due process rights of these people, gang members though they may be. There is a court of law and an immigration court to prove that if the government has the proof. But to summarily deport without due process and by claiming someone's an alien enemy or an enemy combatant, and then argue, as the government has, that the position or the decision by the president, as we're using his commander-in-chief powers, is unreviewable by a federal court, is untenable. I think he's going to keep his temporary restraining order in place. I think we're going to get an order to that effect later today or over the weekend, maybe on Monday. And then we're going to see what happens on Tuesday, because in a separate but related parallel proceeding in the same matter, the judge has told the Trump administration that they need to respond to him and tell him the who, what, where, why, and how of the deportations and to explain how they did not violate what now this Drew Ensign, the lawyer for the Department of Justice, has spilled the beans. The cat's out of the bag. He's admitted that he knew at the time of the hearing that the planes had been ordered, grounded, and returned, which is completely inconsistent with what the government has issued. You're going to see that in the written order by this judge. You know, they took the argument that like, oh, it was oral, it wasn't written, Judge, so we waited around for the writing. We kept deporting in the meantime. He's not buying that. And he doesn't like the fact that Drew Ensign was sent in there with no folder under his arm and no facts so that he couldn't make any mistakes. The judge says, can I get a commitment out of you from the government standpoint? Because this will go a long way to the temporary restraining order, that you will conduct individualized hearings to determine, for instance, whether any of these people satisfy the criteria even under the Alien Enemies Act in the meantime. I don't have that authority, Your Honor. This guy has no authority. So he's going to, I believe the judge, keep the temporary restraining order in place. Wait for the filings on Tuesday as to whether the Trump administration is going to be exercising the state secrecy privilege to try to prevent getting information to the judge. Find ultimately that state secrecy privilege, state secrets privilege doesn't apply. And then find the Trump administration in contempt for violating his order. And I think it's all going to get affirmed by both the D.C. Circuit Court, the appellate court above this judge, and by the United States Supreme Court. But we'll follow it all right here. You've come to the right place. You're on Legal AF. Take a minute, hit the free subscribe button, and follow all things Legal AF here and on the Midas Touch Network, including our top 10 podcast. Yes, you heard it here. Legal AF. Until my next reporting, I'm Michael Popok. In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.